Hello again. It's been about a week. This time I'm going to give you the next two parts. If you look at your right side of your screen, as if you're watching this under HD, you'll see that I had given you last week the Waitkin versus Volosevic. Volosevic. Um, and it's under the category Materialism. Well, this time Josh gives us two games from a student of his. And he goes on to explain how his student actually lost these two games when he could have won. And it's about the psychology of feeling under pressure and not knowing or not just thinking of the best move, that sort of thing. I won't go into too much of a detail for myself. I'll just let Josh explain it to you. But the idea is materialism. And these are two short pieces, so I can give them both to you. Then the next one will be the downward spiral, where Josh explains these last two games as to how you can get into a sort of psychological downward spiral. So without explaining too much, I'm going to go ahead and start this. I'm going to shut the microphone off first because it's going to make a little noise. Okay, here we go.
This next position is taken from the game of a student of mine, Lee Gardner. Lee is a very, very talented young chess player. He actually recently won the Pan Am Games, which is a big tournament, and he got a full scholarship for 4 years at Texas University, which he's very excited about. He's a wonderful human being, a very, very talented chess player, and we've been doing a lot of work on his games, noticing psychological themes, trying to improve upon certain chess ideas. He had the black pieces in this position, and his opponent played h4. And somehow at this point, Lee decided that his position was very bad. Now, it's easy to notice that white is pressuring black. White has a little bit more central space. White was playing h4. It looks like a very aggressive move. Maybe he wants to play h5, h6. He wants to attack. But truth be told, black's game is perfectly fine. There's nothing to worry about. But what happened to Lee here is that he couldn't figure out what to do. He saw that if knight g6, the guy was going to play h5. He saw that the guy was pushing him back. Lee decided that his position was very bad. He made a materialistic judgment. This is a very interesting tendency that he has, and I think we could all learn from it. He judged the position with a finality that was unnecessary. Instead of taking the game as one that was, he has a slightly worse position, but it's a struggle, and the other guy will move, and then I'll move, and we'll go back and forth, and whoever makes the better moves will win. Whoever deals with each situation as it presents itself will gain the upper hand. Instead of looking at it that way, the way he looked at it was, my position is very bad. And here he kind of froze. And Lee is a very strong chess player. If you look up any of his games in a database, you'll see excellent wins that he beats very strong players. But here you'll notice that because of his decision that the position was very bad, he was unable to solve the problems that actually weren't that hard. Let's take a look at how. First of all, he played knight g6, a move that doesn't really do much because after h5 he's going to have to go right back. He had the very strong possibility of queen a4, slightly unusual looking, very dynamic move, attacking the rook on d1 and pressuring the a2 pawn. Now this might seem a little bit unimportant from one perspective because it's only a small pawn on the edge of the board, but in this type of closed game where things are happening very slowly, a pawn can prove decisive. If the rook does something active, like rook d6 or something like that, he can simply take the pawn. If the guy tries to defend the thing with rook a1, Lee is taking control of the d-file, gains some activity, and there's no question that his game is perfectly fine. So with one active move like queen a4, black's game would have been excellent. Lee played knight g6. After h5, he played knight e7, moves that didn't really do that much. Knight on f8 is an excellent defensive piece, and if you're worried about the attack, you should leave it on f8. After knight e7, Lee's opponent played rook takes d8, an error. There's no reason to ever give up control of a d-file like that. Lee took back, rook takes d8, and here he played h6. So now black to play. Your move. What would you do? This is a perfect example of how somebody can get frozen by thinking their position is worse than it actually is. By making a final judgment like, oh no, I'm lost, or I'm much worse, or I'm busted, as opposed to simply playing chess. If you look at it from here, Lee has control of the d-file. His queen can jump out to a4, attacking weaknesses which are quite hard to defend. His knight can come to f5 if it wants to, or g6 if it wants to. albeit rook takes d8 allowed many of these things. It was a bad move by white. And now the guy plays h6. Now Lee was still under the psychological spell of being worse, and because of that judgment, he didn't even really think about the most obvious move, which is g takes h6, after which black is perfectly fine. There's no real way for white to continue the attack. Black can put a knight on f5 if he wants to. g4 will be very, very weakening to kick it off. The knight on g6 can never be kicked away anymore because the h-pawn is gone. Lee has control of the d-file, and it should be mentioned he's up a pawn. If white played queen h4, knight f5 comes with tempo, attacking the queen. Black's game is very good. So after the simple moves g takes h6, black would have an excellent position. And Lee is a very strong chess player. He would have found that no problem. All that was between him and the obvious move was a cloudy emotional state, a psychology that was based on already evaluating the position with unwarranted finality. Because Lee had somehow already given the game to his opponent, he played g6, trusting the other guy's idea. And now white has a very strong pawn on h6, but it's not over yet. Queen f4. Lee's opponent went on with the idea of playing queen f6 to g7 mate. Okay, that's his idea, but there's a lot that can be done about it. Here Lee made another mistake. He could play the move knight f5, which blocks the queen from getting in. Then white would have to play g4. Lee could play knight d4, offer a trade. His opponent would play knight g5, and then after queen e7, knight e4. Some people would look at this position and think that white is winning, but it's not true. The point is that the only real entry into black's position is the f6 square. There's only one way to get in. The queen can't really go there because black can always trade off. And if the knight goes there, the black king simply moves. If white could have both the queen and the knight simultaneously on f6, then of course it would be winning, but there's no way to do that. And so black's position is fine. White's attacking position is very, very limited by the fact that he only has one entry point. Black is fine. But on the other hand, that's a very subtle judgment. To make such a decision as to allow white to get such a bind on f6 with all these different pieces requires a clear head. You have to see, okay, he can get there, but I see that he can't do anything with it. There's no way to make such a judgment when you've already decided your position is very bad, when you're unhappy, when you don't have much confidence, and Lee was not in the right psychological state. After knight c6, Lee allowed his opponent in with queen f6. Now he had to be a little more passive. Queen f8, and knight g5. Now obviously it would have been much better if Lee could have had his queen on e7 so that white couldn't have gotten to this dominant position. But still, truth be told, black is just fine. The only thing that made this position decisive for white is that black believed it was decisive for white. And that's why I bring this position into the discussion. Materialism. If you make a materialistic judgment, you put, even if it's only subconsciously, a finality on your vision of the game which should not exist. The truth about chess is that it's a tremendously complicated struggle. Almost all of the time, when students of mine have shown me their games, when they say now I was winning, the opponent missed 4 chances to get back in the game. And when they say now I'm losing, they miss 4 chances to get back in the game. There's always another shot. So when you find yourself closing off your mind to the struggle, giving an evaluation to the game which doesn't allow you to fight anymore, take a deep breath and think deeper. This is a position like that. What would you do? If you judge this position with a clear head, what you would see is that although white's pieces look very, very strong, and believe me, they do, I know it. White has a knight on g5, a queen on f6, the black queen can't move. The truth of the matter is that white can't do anything with it. The f7 square is defended by the black queen. If the white knight moves, then black can take on h6. If the queen moves, the h6 pawn will fall as long as f7 is defended. Black has complete control of the d-file, and he has a very active knight and a very active rook. Black's game is just fine. If he plays the very strong move rook d2, someone could even make the argument that black is better, even after everything that happened. The b2 pawn is attacked. If it moves, the a2 pawn goes. If white plays the super passive rook b1, then moves like knight d4 can come in. Look at the black knight and the black rook. They're completely centrally placed. Black can also choose to play rook e2 to try to pile up on the e5 square if he wants to, although I wouldn't recommend it because rook d1 can take control of the crucial d-file if black's not careful. This type of position is simply excellent for black. I should also point out that he has the possibility of playing knight f5, which has the effect of trapping the white queen in on its central square. Then you can also take the pawn on h6 with your knight. Black could very easily prove that white was overextended. Now you might have noticed a tactic and wondered why it didn't work, but just take a minute and make sure you see it. If white had tried after rook d2, knight takes e6, f takes e6, queen takes e6, with the idea of forking king and knight, it doesn't quite work because after king h8, queen takes c6, this was much of the idea of rook d2. The black queen and rook are on the f2 square, and after queen f2 check, black wins by force, because after king h2, queen h4 check, king g1, you can take the rook on e1 with check. There's no chance for white to take advantage of the back rank, and black wins. So you see that rook d2 is at once an active move, taking over the 7th rank, attacking the b2 pawn, planning the knight to come into the game, and it also responds to a precise tactic that white had in mind. Knight takes e6. Such decisions require a clear head, and Li again would have found this easily if he had been open to the fact that the game was a hard chess struggle. But instead, Li was colored by the fact that the other guy had pushed the pawn all the way up the board, a queen actively placed, a knight actively placed. Li was confused. He wasn't looking at the game from a clear perspective, and he played knight d4, which is a decisive error for a tactical reason. Do you see how white can win now? After knight d4, white played the very strong tactic knight takes f7, and now black really is in trouble. He can't take back the knight because the rook on d8 hangs. And after rook d7, knight g5, black's best shot will be to play queen takes f6 check, trade off queens and try to hold the endgame, but he's still in very big trouble there. Li played queen takes h6, knight takes e6, and after knight f5, white has a winning move. Try to find it. Do you see what it is? The point is that all of black's pieces are really holding on just by the skin of their teeth, and it really can't hold up anymore. But the most vulnerable piece is the queen on h6, which is defending mate on f8. So I can force it to leave by playing g4. If the in-between move rook f7, then queen d8 check obviously wins. And after knight d4, g5, the black queen has to move off of the f8 square, because g7 is covered. And when the queen moves, then queen f8 is mate. So in this position, after g4, Li resigned. So Li is a very, very strong chess player, and all of the moves that I showed you that he could have played in a normal chess game, or if I gave it to him as a problem, he'd be able to solve without any question, and very quickly. What held him back was judging the position with unwarranted finality, closing his mind to the possibility of all the rich things that he could find. And with a mind that's half closed, we can't play good chess.
Okay, well, that's the first part I'm going to give you. I'm going to pause this in a few minutes, and well, you're not going to notice the pause because I'm just going to pause the video and take care of something and come right back. But in any case, so you can see Josh's point is about the psychology while you're playing. If you get sort of lost in the struggle and you're sort of upset or not seeing clearly, you can easily lose a game that you could have won. And this is how he's talking about his student Lee. So let me go ahead and I'll be right back. I'm just gonna pause this a moment. Let me see if I got the right button here. I think it's let's see. Well, I'll tell you what. We're just gonna do. Okay, so let's get to the next part. Okay, so this is where his student Lee has the white pieces.
Materialism can make itself felt in many different ways. Here's another game of my student, Lee Gardner. It's an endgame position. Lee had the white pieces. His opponent was a master named Reuben Miller. Take a look at this position. White's up a pawn, but it's a doubled A pawn. It's white to move. Before I say anything else, I want you to think about it. What would you do? Another way that result-oriented thought can mess with our heads is in the endgame. I've seen a lot of players reach endgame positions and approach them as if it's the inevitable conclusion to a long struggle. Like, here I am at the end of the game, and now I can just win it, or now I can just draw it, or now I'm losing, because I was losing before. But working with great endgame players, what you learn very quickly is that the endgame is a struggle of its own, a very tense, hard, difficult battle. If you have a better game against a grandmaster and you go into the endgame, you have to win a whole new chess game. Now, often that's the right place to convert your advantage, but you will not convert it by making bad moves. Just how in my game against Vulasevich, I had a winning game, but that didn't mean that I could win by playing bad moves, and I let him back in the game again and again and again, because strong players will be at their very, very most resourceful when their life's on the line. And similarly, in the endgame, to win it, you have to keep on struggling. And so there are two ways to approach this type of position. One way is to think with white, okay, I'm up a pawn, now I have to win, which Lee told me afterwards is how he approached his position. He was looking for how to win. He couldn't find it, so he just made a move. But the other way to approach the position is to play chess. Here it's not the extra a-pawn that gives white the advantage. It's his passed c-pawn and potential activity. What did you find as white's best move? Well, the first question that comes to mind is, should I trade or should I not trade? And if you decided that you shouldn't trade, you're correct. If white plays rook takes f8, then after bishop takes f8, the king is close enough to the c-pawn to defend without any problem. The pawn locked on e5 will be weak. If the pawn on c5 stays there, it could be very weak. White has weaknesses, black doesn't. Black is fine, and his position can turn better very quickly. For example, if he were to play king d7 to c6, win that c-pawn, now white has a problem. It's as if he's down a pawn because of the double a-pawns, and the e5 pawn can become a weakness that has to be dealt with very soon. Things can turn ugly very, very quickly. So no, white should not trade off rooks. So what should white do? Many of you, I'm sure, know the idea of rooks belong behind passed pawns, so the move rook c1 might become attractive to you. The problem with it here is that black can easily blockade that passed pawn. So, for example, after rook f4, if c6, king d8, the next couple moves, black will take on g4 with check. He can always play rook c4 to cut off the white rook's defense of the c-pawn, and he can always blockade on c8 or c7. And the e5 pawn will be very weak once the white bishop moves. So that's not quite the right idea in this position. So what Lee described to me is that when he was thinking about this position, he tried to figure out how do I win. He calculated rook takes f8, bishop takes f8, c6 for a while, and he saw that it didn't quite work. After he made that calculation, he saw that he couldn't win. But because he had been looking for a win, as opposed to simply looking for a way to play chess, he was clouded by the fact that there was no win, and he didn't just look for a chess move, and he played rook f3. Now this is logical from one perspective because now the point is that if it's black to move and black takes on f3, then white can improve his position with king takes f3. But truth be told, this small tempo isn't so important, and the black king is very close to the c5 pawn, so this wasn't the right decision. If Lee had simply been saying to himself, how can I activate my pieces? How can I press my advantage? How can I make the position more complicated for my opponent to defend? He would have very easily found the move rook b1, moving to the open file, planning rook b8 check and rook b7, supporting his c-pawn's advance, inevitably entering into black's queenside. And here white has a great game. After rook b1, if rook f4, rook b8 check, king f7, rook b7 check, king g8, bishop b2, white sacrifices material for tremendous activity. Black would play rook takes g4 check, king f3, and now yes, temporarily it's even material, but white has all the activity. If he plays rook c4, then after rook takes a7, rook takes c5, a5, black's going to have a very, very hard time stopping that a-pawn, because white can support it from the d4 square with the bishop. White's winning. And after rook takes a4, c6, rook c4, c7, white threatens rook b8 check and c8. So black plays king h7, bishop a3, and white wins the game. The next move is going to be bishop d6, defending the pawn, followed by rook b8 and c8. There's nothing for black to do. I should also mention that if instead of king h7, black had played bishop f8, here none of black's pieces can move, and if the rook takes a7, white can win without any problem. If the bishop moves anywhere, then rook a8 check, followed by c8, wins the rook. The black king can never move because of king g7, c8 discover check, making a queen. And the next move for white can be a4, a5, a6. Then he can move his rook to b7, play a7, a8. There's absolutely nothing for black to do, and white wins the game easily. So returning to the original position, Lee looked at rook takes f8 and calculated and saw that he had no way to win that game. In fact, that position would be drawn. If he had been playing just to make a chess move, make the best move, activate his pieces, make the game complicated, push black to the limit, engage in the struggle, he would have found rook b1 very easily, taken over the initiative, and I'm sure he would have won the game. So because Lee was looking for a way to win, and not just to continue with the struggle, he was thrown off when he found that there was no way to win. He played rook f3. His opponent happily traded rooks. Rook takes f3, king takes f3, and king d7. And now Li's psychological state was thrown off. From this position on, this game is very relevant for the next theme as well, the downward spiral. Li was colored by the emotion of the fact that the game had turned from being good for him to being bad for him. And in many ways, he was clinging to the past evaluation while he was analyzing this position. He was trying to figure out what to do. Li played king f4, with the idea of king g5 takes g6. His opponent played bishop h6 check. And now Li's position has reached the critical point. White to move. What would you do? If you have a critical eye in this position, you see that White's pawn is locked on e5. His extra pawn is on a4. The c5 pawn is about to be lost. If the trades were to get made, say the kingside were to get locked up like this, say, and Black were to be able to take on c5 with his bishop, this position is winning for Black because he can gradually attack the queenside pawns, improve in the center, push the d-pawn, play king d5, take on e5. White can't defend because he has no counterattack. So White can't allow that to happen. So given that reality and knowing that it's very important to have passed pawns in the endgame, what would you do with White? This was Li's chance. With tempo, he should have played g5, attacking the bishop. The bishop goes back, and now c6 check. A discovery. Simplify the game. Hold the position. After king takes c6, bishop takes a7, White's game is fine. He has the two passed a pawns. It doesn't matter that he's up a pawn, but he's not down on material, and Black has something to worry about. White can hold this position. And again, I promise you, if I were to give this to my student to solve, I were to say, White to move, what would you do? He would very easily evaluate the position and find the best move. But he was still colored by what happened before, and he was thrown off by the fact that he had judged the position with finality. He closed his mind to the struggle when he said, now I'm winning, and he was looking for the win, as if chess was a book you could just open up and close up. But chess is very, very hard, and now he was unprepared to deal with the complication. g5 would have been the correct decision if he had had a sense of danger, but he played king f3. Now Black played king c6, king e2, bishop f8. There's no way to defend that pawn. King d3, bishop takes c5, bishop c3. And here Black improved his game with a6, and after a long struggle, Black went on to win the game. And this position is very difficult for White to defend because he's, for all practical purposes, down a pawn because these two pawns don't do anything. The e5 pawn is weak. The central d5 pawn is very difficult to handle. Black has a big advantage. So you see what happened. In the critical moment of the game, the first moment I showed you, White could have continued the struggle, and then odds are he would have won the game. But his mindset wasn't about playing chess, struggling, competing. It was about winning. It was about ending the game right there. And so he looked for much more than there was, and he closed himself to the battle.
And there you have it. And this video is barely a half hour long. I could go and give you the next part, the downward spiral introduction. Perhaps I should. Yeah, let me do that. Let me see what happens. I'll give this video a little longer than the rest of them. It's not something he reads. Well, I'm not going to read this to you. One day I was 18 or 19 years old, etc., etc. I think you'll have to see this in HD in order for you to actually be able to read this. So and of course, if I had been actually looking at the clock, I would have realized that the clock is about to make some noise. And okay. I think I'll leave it at that. And yes, it is 11 o'clock, so there you have it. The next one will be the Waitkin versus Kremen. And like I said, to keep on playing. I know I'm improving. I've been improving since I've been giving you these videos, and it's been a little bit of a journey. I hope it's the same for you. Keep on playing.